Jake's coffee mug hit the concrete with a ceramic crack that echoed across the parking lot. Steam rose from the spreading brown puddle as he moved, his body responding with the fluid precision that 2 decades of covert operations had drilled into his bones. The PTSD that usually paralyzed him in moments of crisis seemed to evaporate, replaced by laser focus and cold calculation. The van was a faded blue Ford, maybe 15 years old, with rust eating through the wheel wells and duct tape holding the passenger mirror in place. License plate partially obscured by mud. Deliberate, Jake noted. 2 figures in the front seats, the bearded driver who'd restrained the girl, and a thin woman with stringy blonde hair smoking a cigarette. The child had disappeared from the window, probably forced down below the sight line. Jake's tactical mind processed the scene in milliseconds. 3 adults minimum, 1 child victim, unknown weapons. Moving vehicle meant pursuit would be necessary. His Harley was parked 30 yards away, keys in his jacket pocket. The van was pulling out of its space, headlights sweeping across the lot like searching fingers. No time to call for backup. Even if local law enforcement believed his story, they'd never intercept the van in time. Jake had learned the hard way that sometimes the only choice was to act first and explain later to whoever was left alive to listen. He sprinted toward his motorcycle, combat boots pounding against asphalt, still slick with morning dew. The Sportster roared to life with a mechanical growl that sent a pair of ravens exploding from a nearby dumpster. Jake gunned the engine and tore out of the parking space, gravel spraying behind him as he accelerated toward the access road. The van was already merging onto Highway 87, heading north toward the state line. Smart move, cross jurisdictions, complicate any potential investigation. These weren't amateur opportunists grabbing a random kid. This operation had the hallmarks of professional traffickers, the kind of people who'd perfected their methods through repetition and brutality. Jake leaned into the wind as he closed the distance, keeping 2 car lengths back to avoid detection. The highway was nearly empty at this hour, just a few long-haul truckers grinding through their routes and the occasional commuter heading to an early shift. Perfect cover for moving human cargo without attracting attention. His phone buzzed against his ribs, probably another text from his therapist asking about missed appointments. Dr. Richardson meant well, but she couldn't understand what it meant to see evil in action and do nothing. The nightmares that plagued Jake's sleep weren't just memories of Afghanistan and Somalia. They were also the faces of victims he hadn't been able to save, the operations that went sideways, the children who disappeared into darkness while bureaucrats debated protocols. Not this time. The van took exit 47, a lonely off-ramp that led to industrial complexes and abandoned farmland. Jake followed at a safe distance, his mind already working through tactical approaches. These people had experience, which meant they'd be paranoid about surveillance, but they also had a schedule to keep, a timetable that would make them predictable. As they turned onto a secondary road lined with dying cottonwoods, Jake caught a glimpse of movement in the van's rear window. A small hand pressed against the glass for just a moment before being yanked away. The girl was still fighting, still hoping for rescue. 20 years ago, Lieutenant Jake Morrison would have called for backup, established a perimeter, waited for orders from command. But he wasn't a lieutenant anymore, and there was no command structure to rely on. There was only a broken veteran with blood on his hands and a chance to balance the scales. The van's brake lights flared red in the distance as it slowed for another turn. Jake downshifted and felt the familiar calm of impending action settle over him like armor. Time to go to work. The cold night air hit Jake's face as he stepped outside the truck stop, his mind racing through tactical assessments he hadn't needed in years. The parking lot stretched before him like a battlefield, 18-wheelers creating natural cover and concealment opportunities. He counted vehicles, noted exit routes, and catalogued potential weapons within reach. The white van sat 40 yards away, engine running. Exhaust fumes drifted lazily in the fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows between the trucks. Jake pulled out his phone and pretended to take a call while moving closer, using the massive rigs as cover. Through the van's rear window, he glimpsed movement. Multiple figures. His blood ran cold when he caught sight of small hands pressed against the glass, more than one child. "Jesus," he whispered, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden. This wasn't just about one little girl anymore. Jake circled wide, approaching from the van's blind spot. Years of covert operations had taught him to read situations quickly, and everything about this screamed professional trafficking ring. The van's license plate was mud-covered, but not randomly, deliberately obscured. The driver remained inside while his partner conducted business, standard protocol for a mobile operation. As he drew closer, Jake heard voices through the driver's window. "Told you, 20 minutes max. We're behind schedule already. Relax, Martinez. Kid needed the bathroom. Better than cleaning up a mess later." Jake's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone again, this time for real, and dialed 911. The call went straight to a busy signal. He tried again. Same result. The local dispatch was probably overwhelmed or understaffed, small-town problems that were about to have big consequences. He was on his own. Again. The bathroom door of the truck stop opened, and Jake watched the bearded man emerge, roughly gripping the arm of the same girl who'd signaled for help. She stumbled slightly, and Jake noticed the way she favored her left leg. Injured or restrained, he couldn't tell from this distance. The man's other hand rested inside his jacket, definitely armed. Jake mentally inventoried his own resources, a folding knife clipped to his pocket, his bare hands, and 20 years of training that had turned him into something the enemy used to have nightmares about. But he also had something else, witnesses everywhere. This wasn't Afghanistan or Syria. He couldn't just eliminate threats and disappear into the night. Every action had to be calculated, surgical. The bearded man opened the van's side door, and Jake caught a clearer glimpse inside. 4 children, maybe 5, all young, all terrified. 2 men in the front seats. The girl who'd asked for help looked back toward the truck stop one last time, her eyes scanning desperately. Jake made his decision. He walked casually toward his own truck, parked 3 spaces away from the van, fishing his keys from his pocket. To any observer, he looked like another driver heading home, but his route took him directly past the van's open door. As the bearded man shoved the girl toward the vehicle's interior, Jake stumbled deliberately, dropping his keys with a loud clatter. They skittered under the van. "Damn it," he said loudly, crouching down. "Sorry about that, brother." The bearded man tensed, his hand moving deeper inside his jacket. "No problem. Just grab your keys and move along." Jake made a show of reaching under the van, but his eyes were mapping everything: the interior layout, restraints on the children, the driver's position, sight lines from the truck stop. The girl was looking at him again, recognition flickering in her eyes. "There we go," Jake said, standing with his keys. He looked directly at the man. "Long drive ahead?" "Something like that." The man's voice carried a warning edge. His partner in the driver's seat was watching through the side mirror, engine revving slightly. Jake nodded and took a step back, but he'd seen enough. Zip-tie restraints, drugged expressions on some of the children, a cooler that probably contained more sedatives. This was a well-organized transport, which meant it was part of something much larger. As he walked toward his truck, Jake's mind shifted into mission planning mode. He had maybe 60 seconds before they pulled out. No backup, no support. Just him against at least 2 armed traffickers in a public space filled with potential collateral damage. He reached his truck and opened the door, glancing back as the van's side door slammed shut. The driver was already putting it in gear. Jake's hand moved to his ignition, but he wasn't planning to drive away. He was calculating intercept routes, thinking about how to disable a moving vehicle without killing everyone inside, remembering techniques for close-quarters combat in confined spaces. The van began to move, headlights sweeping across the parking lot as it turned toward the highway exit. Time was up. Those children had maybe 10 minutes before they disappeared into a network that would scatter them across the country or beyond. Jake started his engine and followed. Marcus walked through the automatic doors of the truck stop, his eyes already scanning the interior. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows between the aisles of snacks and travel supplies. A handful of truckers nursed coffee at small tables, while a clerk behind bulletproof glass watched a tiny television with bored indifference. He grabbed a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of water, keeping his movements casual, while his mind calculated angles and exits. The girl was somewhere in that Peterbilt outside. The question was how many people were guarding her, and how heavily armed they were. At the register, he struck up conversation with the clerk, a thin woman in her 50s with tired eyes. Busy night? Same as always. She rang up his items without looking at him. That'll be $6.50. Marcus handed her a 10. See that big rig out there with the Nebraska plates? Those guys been in here long? Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to the register. Something shifted in her expression, a tightness around her mouth that told Marcus she knew more than she was letting on. Don't know nothing about nobody's business, she said, counting out his change with deliberate slowness. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. That little girl with them, she in trouble? The woman's hand froze halfway to the cash drawer. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Marcus saw genuine fear flash across her features. She glanced toward the back office, then quickly shoved his change across the counter. You need to leave, now. Before Marcus could respond, the restroom door swung open, and one of the men from the truck emerged. Up close, Marcus could see the crude tattoos covering his forearms and the predatory way his eyes swept the store. The man's gaze lingered on Marcus for a beat too long. Marcus pocketed his change and headed for the door, feeling the man's stare boring into his back. Outside, he climbed into his pickup and started the engine, but instead of pulling away, he drove to the far edge of the parking lot and killed the lights. The diesel's engine was running, exhaust visible in the cool night air. Through the sleeper cab's curtained window, Marcus caught glimpses of movement. 2 figures, maybe 3. He needed to get closer, but the open parking lot offered little cover. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter, Sarah. Hope you're having a good trip, Dad. Drive safe. Marcus stared at the message, thinking of his own child safe in her college dorm 3 states away. The contrast hit him like a physical blow. Sarah was 19, just 4 years older than the girl trapped in that truck, the girl who had risked everything to signal for help. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Detective Linda Hayes with the Colorado State Police. They'd worked together on a missing persons case 2 years ago. He started to dial, then stopped. By the time law enforcement mobilized, organized a response and moved in, that truck would be long gone. The girl would disappear into a system designed to make people vanish. Marcus had seen enough human trafficking operations during his military service to know how they worked. These weren't amateur opportunists. They were part of a network that moved human cargo across state lines like any other commodity. Once that truck left this parking lot, the chances of finding the girl dropped to almost zero. The passenger door of the Peterbilt opened, and the tattooed man climbed down, followed by another figure Marcus hadn't seen before, a heavy-set man in a leather jacket who moved with the careful precision of someone carrying concealed weapons. They walked toward the store, talking in low voices. This was his window. Marcus slipped out of his pickup and moved along the perimeter of the parking lot, using the shadows cast by the overhead lights. His military training kicked in automatically. Control your breathing, watch your footfalls, stay aware of sight lines. Skills he'd hoped never to use again outside of his nightmares. He approached the truck from the driver's side blind spot. The diesel engine's rumble masked any sound his boots might make on the asphalt. Up close, he could see the sleeper cab more clearly. The curtains were drawn tight, but a thin strip of light showed underneath. Marcus pressed himself against the truck's fuel tank and listened. Voices, at least one adult male still inside, speaking what sounded like Russian or maybe Ukrainian, and something else, a soft whimpering that made his jaw clench. He eased toward the rear of the trailer and noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh scratches around the lock mechanism, multiple sets, as if many desperate hands had tried to claw their way out. This wasn't about one girl. This truck had carried others before her. Store's bell chimed as the two men emerged with coffee and cigarettes. They were heading back, laughing about something. Marcus had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the truck. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message to Detective Hayes. Human trafficking operation at mile marker 247 eastbound. Peterbilt, Nebraska, plates JHG 4829. Moving soon. Send everything. Then Marcus deleted his daughter's text message, knowing there was a good chance he might never see her again. The two men were 20 feet away and closing fast. The child's face haunted him, those wide, terrified eyes, the way she'd pressed her small hand against the window, fingers splayed in the universal distress signal he'd learned to recognize during his time with SEAL Team 6. Most civilians would have missed it entirely, dismissing it as a kid waving, but Marcus had seen that same gesture in Kabul, in the favelas of Sao Paulo, in places where innocence was currency. He maintained a 3-car buffer, switching lanes periodically to avoid detection. The SUV's driver was cautious, but not paranoid, probably a low-level transport operator who thought he was invisible on the interstate. Marcus had tracked better. 20 minutes into the pursuit, his phone buzzed. Text message, unknown number. Stop following, or the girl dies. Marcus's blood chilled. They'd made him. His eyes swept the road ahead, searching for the second vehicle he'd obviously missed. There, a white pickup truck in the right lane, perfectly positioned to watch his movements. Amateur mistake. He'd been so focused on the SUV that he'd overlooked standard counter-surveillance protocol. He eased off the gas, letting distance build between him and the convoy. The text meant they were communicating, coordinated. It also meant they were nervous, which could work in his favor or make them desperate enough to do something stupid. Another text arrived, exit now. Forget what you saw. Instead of complying, Marcus began calculating. 2 vehicles meant at least 3 operators, driver and passenger in the SUV, plus the pickup's driver. Possibly more. The girl was in the SUV, which limited his tactical options. Any direct confrontation risked her life. He needed intelligence. Pulling out his phone, he speed-dialed a number he hadn't called in 2 years. Reaper's Security Services. The voice was gravelly, familiar. Tommy, it's Blackwood. A pause. Well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd gone full hermit on us. I need a favor. License plate trace. Immediate. Marcus, man. You know I'm not in that business anymore. Strictly legitimate security consulting now. Marcus rattled off the SUV's plate number. There's a kid involved, Tommy. Maybe 8 years old. They've got her. The line went quiet for several seconds. Tommy Reaper Morrison had been Marcus's communications specialist, a wizard with electronics and databases. More importantly, he had a daughter the same age. Give me 5 minutes. The convoy ahead was approaching the junction with Highway 287. If they turned north toward Amarillo, it suggested a different destination than he'd initially calculated. If they continued west, they were likely heading for New Mexico, possibly El Paso and the border beyond. The SUV's brake lights flashed. They were slowing for the exit. Marcus's phone rang. The plate comes back to a rental company in Oklahoma City, Tommy said without preamble. Rented 3 days ago by a corporation that doesn't exist. But I dug deeper. The credit card used traces to a shell company with ties to a logistics firm called Meridian Transport. Never heard of them. Neither had I, until I found their name in some FBI field reports from last year. Human Trafficking Task Force was investigating them, but the case went cold. Companies supposedly defunct, but the paperwork was never filed. Marcus watched the SUV disappear down the exit ramp. What else? Meridian operated out of a warehouse complex in Tucumcari, New Mexico, about 90 miles west of your current position. The pieces clicked together. The traffickers weren't just moving the girl, they were taking her to a processing facility, somewhere she could be held, documented, prepared for transport to wherever sick people paid premium prices for children. Tommy, I need you to do something else. Name it. If you don't hear from me in 6 hours, call the FBI field office in Albuquerque. Tell them to hit the Meridian warehouse in Tucumcari. Tell them about the trafficking operation. Marcus, what the hell are you planning? What I should have done a long time ago. He ended the call and pressed harder on the accelerator. The convoy had taken the Highway 287 junction, but instead of heading north, they'd turned south toward the smaller towns scattered across the empty landscape. It was a route that avoided major population centers, perfect for moving human cargo without attracting attention. Marcus had been in similar situations before, but always with backup, always with extraction plans and support teams. This time, it was just him, his truck, and whatever equipment he could improvise. The old familiar weight settled in his chest, not fear but responsibility, the knowledge that someone's life hung in the balance and he was the only thing standing between them and a horror too terrible to contemplate. In the distance, the New Mexico border waited like a deadline he couldn't afford to miss. Marcus slipped around the back of the building, his boots silent on the cracked asphalt. The loading dock stretched before him like a concrete cavern, lit by a single flickering sodium light that cast dancing shadows between the parked trailers. He counted 3 18-wheelers backed up to the dock, their engines ticking as they cooled in the night air. The girl's face haunted him as he moved. That desperate hand signal, taught to kids in schools across America as a silent cry for help, had been unmistakable. Someone had trained her well, probably never imagining she'd need to use it while trapped in a nightmare. He pressed his back against the corrugated metal wall and peered around the corner. 2 men stood near the middle trailer, their cigarettes glowing orange in the darkness. One was the trucker from inside, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks. The other was lean and wiry, wearing expensive jeans and a leather jacket that screamed city money. "How many this run?" Leather Jacket asked, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. 12, the trucker replied, fresh from the Phoenix pickup. Boss wants them moved fast. Heat's getting too close down there. Marcus felt his jaw clench. 12. 12 human lives reduced to cargo numbers. The buyers confirmed for tomorrow night? Yeah, but they want to see the merchandise first, especially the young ones. Leather Jacket flicked his cigarette toward a dumpster. Load them into the warehouse. We'll sort them in the morning. The trucker nodded and climbed onto the loading dock, fishing keys from his pocket. Marcus watched him unlock the trailer's rear door and swing it open with a metallic screech that seemed to echo forever. What emerged from that trailer would be burned into Marcus's memory until the day he died. Children, teenagers, all girls, all terrified, all moving like broken dolls as they were herded from the truck's dark interior. They stumbled in the weak light, some crying silently, others staring ahead with the hollow eyes of the already dead inside. The girl from the truck stop was third in line. Even from 50 feet away, Marcus could see her scanning her surroundings, still fighting, still looking for an escape that didn't exist. "Move it along!" the trucker barked, shoving one of the older girls who had stumbled. She couldn't have been more than 16. Marcus counted. 12, just as they'd said. The youngest looked maybe 10 years old. His hands curled into fists as memories of his own daughter flooded back. Emma laughing on a swing set, Emma taking her first steps, Emma in a hospital bed fighting cancer that would eventually win. These girls deserved the same chance at life his daughter never got. Leather Jacket was on his phone now, pacing near a dark sedan parked beside the building. "Yeah, it's me. We've got the shipment. No problems. Tomorrow night, just like we discussed." Marcus studied the layout with tactical precision. The warehouse door was maybe 20 feet from the trailer. 2 guards he could see, possibly more inside. Unknown number of weapons, at least 1 escape vehicle. The odds were shit, but he'd faced worse in Kandahar. He needed a distraction, something to scatter their formation and give him a chance to get the girls to safety. His eyes found the propane tank feeding the building's heating system, maybe 30 yards to his left. Moving like a shadow, he circled wide around the loading area. The propane tank sat unguarded behind a chain-link fence with a padlock that looked older than his service record. Marcus pulled out his knife, a 7-inch fixed blade he'd carried through 3 tours, and worked the lock until it clicked open. The valve on the tank turned easily, and he could hear the soft hiss of gas beginning to escape. He needed about 2 minutes for enough concentration to build up near the building's pilot light. "What the hell is that smell?" Leather Jacket suddenly called out, looking around nervously. The trucker sniffed the air. "Propane. Shit, there must be a leak somewhere." Marcus smiled grimly. 1 minute 30 seconds. He moved back toward the loading dock, staying low behind a row of parked cars. The last of the girls were being pushed toward the warehouse door. His window was closing fast. The lean man was already heading for his sedan. "I'm not sticking around for a gas explosion. Get them inside and call me when you're done." 1 minute. Marcus checked his sidearm. A Glock 19 with 2 spare magazines. Not much firepower for what was coming, but it would have to do. He thought about Emma one more time, then pushed the grief aside and let the cold calculation of his training take over. Time to go to work. The first explosion lit up the night sky like the 4th of July, and Marcus was already moving before the sound reached his ears. Marcus pressed himself against the maintenance shed, feeling the familiar weight of the Glock tucked against his ribs. The parking lot stretched before him like a chessboard, each vehicle a potential piece in whatever sick game these traffickers were playing. He'd counted at least 4 men moving between the trucks, their casual coordination suggesting military or paramilitary training. The girl was still in the cab of the 18-wheeler, but Marcus could see movement inside. Someone else was with her now, a woman with stringy blonde hair who kept gesturing emphatically. Even from this distance, he could read the body language. The woman was giving instructions, preparing the girl for something. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You have beautiful eyes. Shame if something happened to them." They'd made him. Marcus cursed under his breath and scanned the perimeter. A red laser dot danced across the shed wall next to his head before disappearing. Professional. These weren't street-level thugs. He needed to move, but first he had to know what he was walking into. Marcus pulled out his phone and activated the camera, using the zoom to get a better look at the truck's license plate. Illinois tags, but the numbers were partially obscured by mud, deliberately, he suspected. A diesel engine roared to life somewhere behind him. Marcus spun around to see a black SUV emerging from behind the restaurant, heading straight for his position. No time for subtlety now. He sprinted toward the main parking area, weaving between cars as the SUV's engine grew louder. The driver was trying to pin him down, force him into the open where the sniper could get a clean shot. Marcus dove behind a minivan just as bullets sparked off the asphalt where he'd been standing. The family inside the minivan started screaming. Marcus pounded on their window. "Get down! Stay down!" Another vehicle had joined the hunt, a pickup truck with 2 men in the bed, both armed. They were boxing him in, using the civilian vehicles as cover while trying to flush him toward their kill zone. Marcus had been in similar situations in Fallujah, but there he'd had backup and rules of engagement. Here he was on his own with innocent bystanders everywhere. He low-crawled under the minivan, emerging on the passenger side, and made a dash for the truck where the girl was being held. If he could reach her, he might be able to use the confusion to... The 18-wheeler's engine thundered to life. No, no, no. Marcus broke into a full sprint, abandoning stealth. They were moving her. In 30 seconds, that truck would be on the highway and the girl would vanish into the vast network of interstate commerce, just another piece of cargo. The blonde woman jumped down from the cab and ran toward a waiting sedan. Marcus caught a glimpse of her face. Hollow cheeks, dead eyes, track marks on her arms. A victim turned accomplice, probably threatened into compliance. The sniper took another shot. The bullet shattered the windshield of a car 10 feet to Marcus's left, close, but the angle was wrong. Marcus used that knowledge, staying low and using the vehicle heights to mask his approach. The 18-wheeler was starting to roll. Marcus could see the driver through the side window, a heavy-set man with a beard, talking rapidly into a cell phone. In the sleeper cab behind him, a curtain twitched. The girl was back there, probably restrained now. Marcus reached the truck just as it began picking up speed. He grabbed the passenger side door handle and pulled. Locked. The driver saw him and swerved hard to the right, trying to throw him off. Marcus held on, his boots scraping against the asphalt. The black SUV was closing in from behind. Marcus could see the muzzle flash from the passenger window as they fired at him. A bullet punched through the truck's side panel, inches from his head. Using his momentum, Marcus swung himself up onto the running board and drove his elbow through the passenger window. Safety glass exploded inward as he reached through and unlocked the door. The driver was screaming into his phone, "He's on the goddamn truck! Where's your clean shot?" Marcus hauled himself into the cab just as the driver reached for something under his seat. Marcus was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted until he heard bone crack. A snub-nosed revolver clattered to the floor. "Stop the truck," Marcus growled. Instead, the driver stomped on the gas. The 18-wheeler surged forward, heading for the highway on-ramp. Marcus glanced in the side mirror. The black SUV was right behind them, and the pickup truck had flanked them on the left side. From behind the curtain separating the cab from the sleeper, Marcus heard a small voice. "Help me." His blood went cold. She was right there, maybe 8 feet away, but he was trapped in a rolling battle with at least 6 armed hostiles in pursuit. One wrong move and they'd all be dead. The highway stretched ahead like a dark river, ready to swallow them all. 53 names. 53 children who had passed through this pipeline in the last 6 months alone. Ages ranging from 8 to 16, photos that made his stomach turn. And at the bottom of the digital manifest, a shipping schedule that sent ice through his veins. The next transport was tonight. His burner phone buzzed against the motel sink. Unknown number. "Yeah, you're making a lot of people very unhappy." The voice was smooth, educated, with the faintest trace of an accent Jake couldn't place. Not Rodriguez. This was someone higher up the food chain. "Good. That means I'm doing something right." A soft chuckle. "Mr. Torres, isn't it? Former Lieutenant Commander Jacob Torres, SEAL Team 6. Impressive service record. Though I notice it ends rather abruptly." Jake's jaw tightened. They'd done their homework. Cut to the chase. "You have something that belongs to us. We have something you want. The girl, I mean, sweet little Elena. She's been asking for her mama." The phone creaked in Jake's grip. "If you hurt her—" "Oh, we won't hurt her. She's valuable merchandise. But her comfort level— well, that depends entirely on how reasonable you choose to be. What do you want?" "The drive. And any copies you might have made. There's a warehouse at 2247 Industrial Boulevard. Come alone, come unarmed, and we can arrange a simple exchange. You have 2 hours." The line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, his mind racing through tactical assessments. It was obviously a trap. They had no intention of letting either him or Elena walk away. But it was also an opportunity. Finally, a concrete location instead of chasing shadows through the underbelly of the city. He opened his duffel bag and began methodically checking his gear. The Glock 19 he'd taken from Rodriguez's man, 2 spare magazines, the tactical knife his old team leader had given him as a parting gift, and a few other items he'd acquired during his years of running dirty operations the Navy preferred to forget. His fingers lingered on a small plastic device that looked like a hearing aid but served a very different purpose. Military-grade explosive, enough to take out a room or create the distraction he might need. He'd hoped never to use it again, but some situations called for the tools of his darker past. The warehouse district was a sprawling maze of concrete and corrugated steel, perfect for the kind of business that preferred to operate in shadows. Jake parked 6 blocks away and approached on foot, using the industrial landscape for cover as he conducted reconnaissance. 2247 Industrial Boulevard squatted like a concrete beast between 2 smaller buildings, its loading docks facing an empty lot strewn with rusted shipping containers. A single light burned over the main entrance. 2 men in dark clothing flanked the door, the bulges under their jackets suggesting they were well armed. Jake circled the perimeter, noting the positions of vehicles, escape routes, and potential sniper nests. The operation was professional, not the sloppy setup he might have expected from Rodriguez's street-level crew. This was the real organization, the puppet masters who'd been pulling the strings. He found what he was looking for on the building's north side, an old storm drain that ran beneath the warehouse foundation. The grate was rusted but yielded to pressure from his knife. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders, but it led him under the building to an access point near the electrical systems. The warehouse floor opened up before him like a cavern, dimly lit by scattered work lights hanging from the ceiling. Wooden crates were stacked in orderly rows, and the industrial smell of diesel fuel and concrete dust filled his nostrils. But it was what he saw in the center of the space that made his blood freeze. A row of metal shipping containers, modified with ventilation holes and reinforced locks. From one of them, he could hear muffled voices, children's voices, speaking in frightened whispers. Movement caught his eye. 3 men in tactical gear were positioning themselves around the main entrance, clearly expecting his arrival. But more concerning was the figure emerging from a makeshift office area, a tall man in an expensive suit who moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to absolute control. As Jake watched from his concealed position, the man checked his watch and spoke into a radio. "He's late. That's not a good sign." "Maybe he's not coming," one of the gunmen replied. "Oh, he's coming." The man's voice carried clearly across the warehouse floor. "Men like Torres don't abandon their missions. It's what makes them useful and what makes them predictable." Jake smiled grimly. They were about to learn just how unpredictable a desperate SEAL could be. The facility sprawled before him like a concrete maze. Through the chain-link fence, he counted 6 buildings connected by covered walkways. Security cameras swept predetermined arcs from the corners, their red lights blinking in steady rhythms. 2 guards walked the perimeter, flashlights bobbing as they made their rounds every 12 minutes. Marcus had timed them twice already. From his position, he could see movement through the frosted windows of the main building. Shadows passed back and forth, too many to be just the drivers he'd followed here. His jaw clenched as he thought about what those shadows might represent. How many kids were trapped inside? How many had already been moved through this place? The girl's terrified eyes flashed through his memory, steel sharpening his resolve. He pulled out his phone and opened the voice memo app, speaking in barely a whisper. "If something happens to me, send this to FBI agent Sarah Chen, Phoenix Field Office. Location is 2847 Industrial Boulevard, off Route 93. Human trafficking operation, multiple buildings, unknown number of victims inside." He attached his GPS coordinates and scheduled the message to send in 2 hours. If he wasn't around to cancel it, at least someone would know where to look. Marcus studied the guard rotation one more time, then moved. He'd identified a blind spot between cameras near the southeast corner, where overgrown weeds created additional cover. Staying low, he crossed the open ground in a sprint, his footsteps silent on the gravel. The fence was 12 feet of chain link topped with razor wire, but Marcus had scaled worse under enemy fire. He pulled wire cutters from his jacket, a purchase from the hardware store that had raised no eyebrows, and began working on a section hidden by tall grass. The metal gave way with soft snips that seemed thunderous in the quiet night. Once through, he belly crawled toward the nearest building, timing his movement between the security camera sweeps. The smell hit him before he reached the structure. Industrial disinfectant trying to mask something much worse. His stomach turned. The building's side door was heavy steel with an electronic lock. Marcus examined it closely, noting the model number. He'd encountered similar systems overseas. From his pocket, he retrieved a small device that looked like a garage door opener, another gift from his Black Ops days that he'd never returned to Quartermaster. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Marcus eased the door open, every sense on high alert. The hallway beyond was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The disinfectant smell was stronger here, underlaid with the scent of fear and unwashed bodies. He moved forward, checking each room systematically. Most were empty, but the evidence of their use was clear. Mattresses on the floor, restraints bolted to walls, buckets in corners. His hands clenched into fists. At the end of the hall, he heard voices. Male, casual conversation about sports scores and weekend plans, as if they were discussing the weather instead of destroying lives. Marcus positioned himself beside the doorway and listened. Shipment goes out tomorrow night. Boss wants everything clean before the new batch arrives Thursday. What about the problem kid? The one who tried to run? She's in isolation. Boss said to make an example. Marcus's blood went cold. The girl from the truck stop. It had to be. Building C. Yeah. Third cell. Little fighter, that one. Gonna be a long night for her if she doesn't learn to cooperate. The casual cruelty in their voices made Marcus's vision narrow. He forced himself to remain calm, to think tactically. 2 men in this room, unknown number in the compound. The girl was in Building C, which he identified as the structure furthest from his current position. He needed a distraction. Marcus retraced his steps to the entry door, then pulled the fire alarm. Immediately, strobing lights filled the hallway and a piercing siren shattered the night's silence. He heard shouts, footsteps running, confusion spreading through the compound. In the chaos, he slipped back outside and sprinted toward Building C. The guard rotation had dissolved as personnel responded to the alarm. Security protocols were failing. They clearly weren't prepared for an actual emergency. Building C's door was already propped open by someone evacuating. Marcus slipped inside against the flow of people rushing out, just another shadow in the confusion. The hallway here was different. Cells instead of rooms, with heavy doors and small windows. He found the third cell and peered through the reinforced glass. A small figure huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. The girl from the truck stop looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, neither moved. Then she stood, hope flickering across her face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Marcus tried the door handle, knowing it would be locked but needing to confirm. The electronic lock was the same model as before. He reached for his device. The warehouse district stretched before Marcus like a concrete graveyard, rows of industrial buildings casting jagged shadows under the pale morning sun. He crouched behind a rusted shipping container, studying the target through binoculars he'd liberated from the security guard's equipment. The building matched the GPS coordinates perfectly, a nondescript structure with reinforced windows and minimal signage. 2 guards flanked the main entrance, their casual stance masking the tactical awareness Marcus recognized immediately. These weren't ordinary rent-a-cops. The way they scanned their surroundings, the positioning that covered all approach angles, the bulges beneath their jackets. These men had military training. Marcus counted at least 4 vehicles in the lot, 2 black SUVs, a panel van with tinted windows, and an 18-wheeler backed up to the loading dock. The truck's engine was running, exhaust visible in the cool air. Whatever was happening inside, they were preparing to move. His phone buzzed with a text from the disposable number he'd given Detective Hayes, units mobilizing. ETA 45 minutes minimum. 45 minutes. The girl might have 5. Marcus pocketed the phone and began his approach, using the maze of containers and abandoned equipment as cover. Every instinct screamed against going in alone, but those same instincts had kept him alive through a dozen impossible missions. The key was turning disadvantage into opportunity. He circled to the building's north side, where a fire escape climbed the exterior wall. The metal ladder was old but sturdy, designed for industrial use rather than emergency evacuation. Marcus tested the first rung, then began his ascent, moving with deliberate silence. At the 3rd-floor landing, he found what he was looking for, a maintenance window with a simple latch lock. The glass was grimy enough to obscure the interior while still allowing him to work. Marcus pulled out his tactical knife and slipped the blade between the window frame and sill, applying gentle pressure until the latch clicked open. Inside, the building was a maze of catwalks and suspended platforms overlooking the main floor. Industrial ventilation ducts snaked overhead, providing both cover and a clear view of the operation below. Marcus belly-crawled across a service walkway, positioning himself directly above the central area. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. 12 people sat on metal folding chairs arranged in a rough semicircle, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Most were young women, but Marcus spotted at least 3 who couldn't be older than 16. The girl from the truck stop was there, third from the left, her eyes vacant with exhaustion and fear. 4 armed men moved among the captives, like ranchers inspecting livestock. A 5th man in an expensive suit stood near a folding table covered with documents and cash. He was speaking into a cell phone, his tone businesslike and cold. "The shipment's ready for transport," Suit was saying. 12 units as requested. Payment confirmation received for the premium selections. Premium selections. Marcus's jaw clenched as the man gestured toward the youngest victims. One of the guards approached the suited man. "Tony's running late with the transport papers. You want us to load them anyway?" "Negative. Can't risk a checkpoint without proper documentation. We wait 10 more minutes, then we move with what we have." 10 minutes. Marcus checked his gear. Tactical knife, Glock with 2 spare magazines, 3 flashbang grenades, and the pepper spray canister. Against 5 armed men in an open space with innocent lives in the crossfire, it would have to be enough. He studied the layout, identifying key positions and calculating angles of fire. The captives were positioned in the center of the room, making a direct assault nearly impossible without risking their safety. But the arrangement also created opportunity. If he could control the guards' movement, funnel them away from the civilians. Marcus crawled toward the building's power distribution panel, mounted on the wall near his position. Industrial buildings like this typically had centralized electrical systems with manual override switches. He located the main breaker and prepared to move. His phone vibrated with another message from Hayes, delayed. "Federal jurisdiction issues, hold position." Federal jurisdiction. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. While bureaucrats argued over paperwork, children were being prepared for shipment like cargo. He deleted the message and switched the phone to silent mode. Below, the man in the suit was growing impatient. "Load the transport. We've waited long enough." The guards began moving toward the captives, producing keys to unlock their restraints for the short walk to the truck. The girl from the truck stop looked up as her guard approached, and for a brief moment her eyes found Marcus through the darkness above. He placed a finger to his lips, then made a subtle downward gesture with his hand. "Stay low." She gave an almost imperceptible nod. Marcus gripped the main breaker switch, mentally rehearsing his next moves. In 30 seconds, the warehouse would be plunged into darkness. In 60 seconds, he would either be dead or well on his way to completing an impossible rescue. Time to find out which. The warehouse district sprawled before Marcus like a concrete maze, each building a potential fortress, hiding unspeakable horrors. He ditched the stolen sedan 6 blocks back, approaching on foot through the industrial shadows. The Glock sat heavy against his ribs, a familiar weight that brought neither comfort nor dread, just cold certainty. 2 hours had passed since he'd left Rodriguez bleeding in that motel room. 2 hours closer to Sarah vanishing forever into the trafficking pipeline that stretched across state lines like a cancer. The detective's phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Backup units, FBI notifications, containment protocols. All useless bureaucratic noise when a child's life hung in the balance. Marcus pressed himself against a corrugated wall and peered around the corner. The target warehouse sat 3 buildings down, its loading dock illuminated by harsh sodium lights. 2 guards flanked the main entrance, their postures casual but alert, professional muscle, not street thugs. That meant Kozlov was taking no chances after the truck stop incident. The building's blueprints, pulled from city planning records during his brief internet search at a 24-hour cafe, revealed 3 potential entry points. The main loading dock, 2 exposed, fire exits on the east and west sides, likely alarmed and monitored. That left the skylight access he'd spotted during his initial reconnaissance. He studied the guards' patrol pattern for another 10 minutes, timing their movements with the precision that had kept him alive through 8 years of special operations. Every 90 seconds, they'd converge near the entrance for a brief exchange before splitting apart again. A 15-second window of opportunity if he could reach the building's rear wall undetected. Marcus slipped through the shadows between abandoned trucks and shipping containers, his boots silent on the oil-stained asphalt. The warehouse loomed larger as he approached, its concrete facade scarred by decades of industrial use. Rusted fire escapes clung to its sides like metal veins, leading up to the roof where ventilation units hummed their mechanical lullabies. The climb took 8 minutes, slow, methodical movements that avoided the creaking sections of metal grating. At the roof's edge, he could hear voices drifting up from the loading dock. Russian accents mixing with American drawls discussing schedules and transfers with the casual indifference of men trading livestock. The skylight sat 20 feet from the building's edge, its grimy glass panels revealing nothing but darkness below. Marcus approached in a low crouch, his breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. This was the moment that separated the living from the dead, the transition from hunter to prey in enemy territory. He tested the skylight's frame with gentle pressure. Locked, but the mechanism was old and corroded. A few minutes with his tactical knife loosened the hardware enough to create a gap wide enough for entry. The drop looked to be 15 feet into what appeared to be an empty section of the warehouse floor. Marcus lowered himself through the opening, hanging by his fingertips before releasing into a controlled fall. His knees absorbed the impact with barely a whisper of sound. The warehouse interior stretched before him like a cavern, divided into sections by chain-link partitions and shipping containers arranged in maze-like patterns. Voices echoed from the building's far end, multiple speakers engaged in heated discussion. He moved toward the sound, using the container rows as cover while his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. Emergency exits glowed red in the distance, providing just enough illumination to navigate without night vision equipment. The first partition revealed empty holding cells, chain-link cages with mattresses and buckets that told a story no human should have to read. Fresh scratches marked the concrete floor where desperate fingers had clawed for escape. The smell of fear and desperation hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus pushed deeper into the warehouse, his weapon drawn and ready. Each step brought him closer to the voices, closer to Sarah, closer to the moment when his carefully controlled approach would explode into violent action. There would be no clean extraction here, no surgical strike that left everyone breathing. Too many people knew too much, and Sarah had seen too many faces. A child's cry pierced the air, not Sarah's voice, but another victim trapped in this concrete hell. The sound triggered something primal in Marcus, a fury that he'd kept leashed since leaving the service. These weren't enemy combatants fighting for ideology or territory. They were predators who traded in innocence, parasites who fed on society's most vulnerable members. The voices grew clearer as he approached the warehouse's main staging area. Russian commands mixed with English responses, coordinating what sounded like an imminent departure. Time was running out faster than anticipated. Whatever timeline Kozlov had established was accelerating, probably triggered by the chaos at the truck stop and the compromised safe house. Marcus reached the final container row and peered around its edge. The warehouse's central area opened before him like a theater of horrors, complete with audience, performers, and a stage set for unspeakable acts. His jaw tightened as he counted targets and calculated angles of attack. Sarah sat in a cage 20 feet away, her small form barely visible in the shadows. The warehouse district stretched out like a concrete graveyard under the pale morning light. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the target building through his binoculars. The GPS tracker had led him here, to a sprawling industrial complex that looked abandoned from the outside, but showed subtle signs of activity, fresh tire tracks in the dirt, a barely visible security camera mounted under the eaves, and the telltale hum of generators running somewhere inside. His phone buzzed with another message from Detective Rodriguez, units 20 minutes out. Do not engage until we arrive. 20 minutes might as well be 20 years. Marcus had seen enough trafficking operations to know they could move victims in minutes once they sensed trouble. Sarah didn't have 20 minutes. He circled the perimeter, counting 4 possible entry points. The main entrance faced the access road, too exposed. Loading docks on the east side were sealed shut. That left the side entrance near the administrative offices or the maintenance door by the utility meters. Both had sight lines from the road, but the maintenance entrance offered better concealment. A black SUV pulled up to the main entrance, the same model he'd seen at the truck stop. Marcus pressed himself against the container as 2 men got out. Even from a distance, he recognized the casual arrogance in their movements, the way they scanned their surroundings with practiced eyes. These weren't street-level muscle, they were professionals. The men disappeared inside, and Marcus made his move. He sprinted across the open ground to the maintenance door, his boots silent on the asphalt. The lock was commercial grade, but not military. 30 seconds with his lockpicks and he was inside. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit, filled with the ambient noise of HVAC systems and electrical equipment. Marcus moved forward, every sense heightened, his Glock drawn and ready. The building was larger than it appeared from outside, a maze of offices, storage rooms, and what looked like a loading area that connected to the main warehouse floor. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead. Marcus followed the sound, staying close to the walls, using the mechanical noise as cover. Through a partially open door, he caught a glimpse of what had once been the building's main office space. Now it was something else entirely. The room had been converted into a monitoring station. Multiple screens showed feeds from various locations, other warehouses, truck stops, highway rest areas. A man in an expensive suit sat behind a desk, speaking rapidly into a phone in what sounded like Russian. Behind him, a younger man tracked locations on a digital map, moving colored pins with mechanical precision. Marcus pulled back, processing what he'd seen. This wasn't just a holding facility, it was a command center, a hub for a much larger operation. The scope of it made his chest tighten. How many victims were they processing? How many Sarahs were out there? He continued deeper into the building, following a corridor that led toward the warehouse proper. The voices grew louder, more numerous. Through a small window in a fire door, he could see into the main space. The warehouse floor had been divided into sections by hanging plastic sheeting, creating a series of makeshift rooms. In the center, several men stood around a table covered with documents and what looked like identification cards. But it was the movement in the plastic-enclosed areas that made Marcus's blood run cold. Children, at least a dozen of them, sitting on thin mattresses, their faces blank with the kind of resignation that came from having hope systematically beaten out of them. Most appeared to be between 8 and 16 years old, girls and boys, various ethnicities, all wearing the same defeated expression. Marcus scanned the group, searching. There, in the far corner section, barely visible through the translucent barriers, a small figure with dark hair, sitting with her knees drawn up to her chest. Sarah. She was alive, but even from this distance, he could see she was hurt. Her movements were careful, guarded, the way someone moved when everything ached. Rage built in Marcus's chest like a pressure cooker, threatening to overwhelm his tactical thinking. 3 guards patrolled the main floor, armed with what looked like modified AR-15 seconds. 2 more men worked at a table, processing documents. The men from the SUV were talking to someone Marcus couldn't see, their body language suggesting an important conversation. His phone vibrated again. Rodriguez, 15 minutes. We have SWAT en route. 15 minutes was still too long. Marcus could see preparation happening on the warehouse floor. Boxes being moved, papers being gathered. They were getting ready to relocate, standard protocol when a location was compromised. Sarah shifted position, and even through the plastic sheeting, Marcus could see her face clearly for the first time since the truck stop. She was looking around with alert eyes, not the broken stare of the other children. Whatever they'd done to her, they hadn't destroyed her spirit yet. That was about to work in both their favors. Marcus backed away from the door, already formulating his approach. 5 armed men, at least a dozen children to protect, and a building with limited exits. The odds were terrible, but he'd faced worse in Kandahar. The difference was, this time, it was personal. The warehouse district stretched before Marcus like a concrete graveyard, shadows pooling between hulking buildings that had seen better decades. He parked the stolen sedan 3 blocks away, close enough to move quickly but far enough to avoid detection. The Glock felt reassuring against his ribs as he checked his watch, 2:47 a.m. The meeting wasn't scheduled until dawn, but Marcus had learned long ago that early arrivals often lived longer. He moved through the maze of loading docks and rusted fire escapes with practiced silence, his boots finding purchase on familiar urban terrain. 20 years of covert operations had taught him to read a location's weaknesses, and this place had plenty. Multiple exit points, poor lighting, and enough ambient noise from the nearby interstate to mask any unfortunate sounds that might occur. The target warehouse sat at the district's heart, a 3-story behemoth with broken windows and graffiti-scarred walls that screamed abandonment to casual observers. But Marcus noticed details others would miss: fresh tire tracks in the gravel, security cameras disguised as broken fixtures, and the faint glow of interior lighting bleeding through blackout curtains on the 2nd floor. He circled the perimeter twice, cataloguing entry points and potential threats. 2 guards patrolled the exterior, amateurs who moved in predictable patterns and spent more time on their phones than watching the shadows. Inside, thermal imaging would have been helpful, but Marcus had learned to work with what he had. A fire escape on the building's north side offered the best approach. The metal groaned softly under his weight as he climbed, but the interstate's constant rumble swallowed the sound. The 2nd-floor window he'd targeted was painted black, but a small gap at the bottom edge allowed him to peer inside. What he saw made his blood turn to ice water. Cages, dozens of them, arranged in neat rows like some nightmare warehouse inventory, each one barely large enough for a child to stand upright. Most were occupied, young faces staring into nothing with the hollow expressions of the broken. Maya wasn't visible from his angle, but the sheer scope of the operation hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about one girl anymore. This was an industrial-scale horror factory. Marcus forced himself to compartmentalize, to shift into the cold operational mindset that had kept him alive through 2 decades of wet work. Emotions were luxury items he couldn't afford right now. He had a job to do. He counted 6 guards inside, armed but relaxed. They clearly weren't expecting trouble in their fortress of misery. Marcus identified the leader, a thick-necked man with gang tattoos who barked orders in accented English. Russian, maybe Ukrainian. The pieces were falling into place. Moving to another window, he finally spotted Maya in a cage near the far wall. She looked smaller than he remembered, curled into a defensive ball with her arms wrapped around her knees, but she was alive, and that was what mattered. The warehouse's layout worked in his advantage. A network of catwalks and support beams crisscrossed the ceiling, providing both concealment and elevated firing positions. Getting down to the children would be the challenge. Too much open ground, too many angles of attack. Marcus retreated to plan his assault. He had maybe 3 hours before the place would likely come alive with morning activity. 3 hours to dismantle an operation that had probably taken years to build. He thought about calling Detective Morrison, but dismissed the idea immediately. By the time backup arrived, the children would be gone or worse. This was the kind of situation that demanded immediate action, and Marcus had spent his entire adult life training for exactly these moments. The approach would have to be surgical, quick, quiet, and devastating. Take out the sentries first, then the interior guards before they could radio for help or harm the children. Extract the kids through the loading dock while establishing a defensive perimeter. Simple in concept, complex in execution, and absolutely dependent on everything going according to plan. Marcus checked his weapons one final time. The Glock, 2 spare magazines, the combat knife, and the small explosive charges he'd improvised from materials in Thompson's garage. Not much firepower for an operation this size, but SEAL training had taught him to maximize every advantage. As he prepared to move, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Change of plans. Dawn pickup moved to 4 a.m. Be ready. Marcus's jaw tightened. Someone in the pipeline was getting nervous, probably spooked by Thompson's death and the police attention. That cut his window to less than an hour. He looked back at the warehouse, thinking about Maya and all the other children trapped inside, about the monsters who profited from their suffering, about justice delayed becoming justice denied. Marcus Steele melted back into the shadows, every muscle coiled for violence. Time to remind the world why Navy SEALs were the most feared warriors on the planet. The hunt was about to begin. The warehouse district stretched out like a concrete graveyard under the pale dawn light. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the target building through binoculars he'd lifted from the hardware store. The place looked dead, but he'd learned long ago that appearances killed more operators than bullets. 3 black SUVs sat parked outside the main entrance. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements lazy but consistent. Amateur hour, but amateurs with automatic weapons were still dangerous. Marcus counted windows, exits, blind spots. The building had been a textile factory once. High ceilings, open floor plans, multiple ways in and out. Good for him, bad for anyone trying to contain hostages. His phone buzzed. Sarah's voice came through tight with tension. Marcus, you need to know something. I've been tracking the financial records deeper. This isn't just about trafficking kids for exploitation. What do you mean? They're harvesting organs, the medical equipment purchases, the surgical supplies. It's a full operation. These children aren't just being sold, they're being butchered. Marcus felt ice form in his veins. He'd seen horrors in Afghanistan, Syria, places where human life meant nothing. But this was different. This was industrial evil, bureaucratized cruelty. How long do we have? Based on their schedule patterns? Maybe hours. They move fast once they bring kids to a facility like this. The line went dead. Marcus pocketed the phone and checked his gear one more time. The pistol felt inadequate, but it would have to do. He'd made do with less. Moving from shadow to shadow, he circled the building. The guards were predictable, meeting at the front corner every 6 minutes before splitting off. Standard sweep pattern. Textbook lazy. On the 3rd pass, Marcus made his move. The first guard never saw him coming. A sleeper hold from behind, applied with surgical precision. The man went limp in 8 seconds. Marcus caught the falling body, dragged it behind a dumpster, and took the guard's radio and submachine gun. Guard 2 was checking his phone when Marcus appeared beside him like a ghost. Another sleeper hold, another weapon acquired. 2 down, unknown number to go. The side entrance was locked but not alarmed. Marcus picked it in 30 seconds, muscle memory from a dozen similar operations. The door opened onto a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and fear. Voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Marcus followed them, moving like smoke through the shadows. The corridor opened onto a main floor that made his blood run cold. Medical tables gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights. Surgical instruments lay arranged on steel trays. 4 stands, monitoring equipment, coolers marked with biohazard symbols. Everything sterile and ready. "Prep the girl," a voice called from across the space. "The buyer wants the kidney harvested fresh." Marcus's vision went red. He forced himself to breathe, to think tactically. Emotion got people killed, but the rage was there, burning like acid in his chest. He counted 4 men on the main floor, plus whoever was upstairs giving orders. The children had to be on the 2nd level. He could hear muffled sounds from above. The first man died before he realized death had found him. Marcus came out of the shadows like a predator, the knife sliding between ribs to find the heart. He lowered the body silently. The second man turned just as Marcus reached him. No time for stealth. The blade took him across the throat. cutting off his scream before it began. "Hey, Rodriguez, you copy?" The radio crackled. Marcus keyed the mic, grunted an affirmative. 2 down, 2+ unknowns to go. Marcus moved toward the stairs, using equipment and shadows for cover. A man appeared at the top of the stairwell, automatic rifle in hand. Marcus put 2 rounds center mass before the target could shout a warning. The body tumbled down the stairs with a series of wet thuds. "What the hell?" Another voice from upstairs, cut off by running footsteps. Marcus took the stairs 3 at a time, the submachine gun ready. The second floor was divided into small rooms, probably offices once. Now they were cells. He could hear whimpering, crying, terrified whispers in multiple languages. The hallway stretched ahead, doors on both sides. At the far end, a man in surgical scrubs stood over a table where a small figure lay strapped down. Marcus recognized the dark hair, the familiar pink jacket. Lily. The surgeon looked up as Marcus appeared, scalpel in his hand. "Don't come any closer or—" Marcus put a bullet through his shoulder, spinning him away from the table. The scalpel clattered to the floor. The man screamed, clutching his shattered joint. "Where are the keys?" Marcus's voice was Arctic death. The surgeon pointed with his good hand toward a desk. Marcus grabbed the ring of keys, keeping the gun trained on the wounded man. Lily's eyes were wide with terror and drugs, but she was alive. Marcus began cutting her restraints with the dropped scalpel. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you." The warehouse district stretched before Marcus like a concrete maze, each building a potential fortress hiding unspeakable horrors. His ribs screamed with every breath, and blood from the head wound had dried into a crusty trail down his neck, but he pushed forward through the industrial shadows. The burner phone buzzed against his chest, Detective Chen's contact responding to his desperate message about the trafficking ring's location. 3 blocks ahead, the red semi sat like a metal predator beside a rust-stained warehouse. Marcus counted 4 guards positioned around the perimeter, their casual stance betraying overconfidence. They thought they'd eliminated the threat when his truck went over that embankment. They were wrong. Moving through the maze of shipping containers and abandoned machinery, Marcus closed the distance. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded his mouth as muscle memory took over, every step calculated, every shadow utilized. This was what he'd been trained for, even if he'd hoped never to need these skills again. The first guard never saw him coming. Marcus emerged from behind a concrete pillar like smoke, his arms snaking around the man's throat in a blood choke that dropped him in seconds. The unconscious body disappeared behind a stack of pallets, and Marcus claimed the guard's radio and pistol. Radio chatter crackled through his earpiece, package loaded and ready for transport. ETA, 15 minutes to the dock. His blood turned to ice. They were moving the children, moving Sarah to the port. Once those kids reached international waters, they'd vanish into a nightmare from which few ever returned. Marcus sprinted toward the warehouse's side entrance, abandoning stealth for speed. The second guard rounded the corner just as Marcus reached the door. The man's eyes widened, hand diving for his weapon, but Marcus was already in motion. A brutal knee strike folded the guard forward, and a precise elbow to the base of his skull ended the threat. Inside, the warehouse hummed with urgent activity. Marcus pressed against the wall, observing through a gap in the loading dock doors. His heart hammered as he spotted them, 12 children, including Sarah, huddled together near the semi's trailer. Sarah's distinctive red jacket was torn, her face pale but defiant. 4 more men supervised the loading operation, while Victor Kozlov paced nearby, barking orders in accented English. "Move faster! The ship waits for no one, and we've already had too many complications." Marcus keyed the radio, mimicking the unconscious guard's gruff voice. Perimeter breach on the north side. Possible police reconnaissance. The effect was immediate. Kozlov's face darkened as he gestured to 2 of his men. "Check it out. Kill anyone you find." As the men jogged toward the warehouse's far end, Marcus moved. He slipped through the side entrance and scaled a maintenance ladder to the catwalk running along the warehouse's upper level. From this vantage point, he could see the entire operation and plan his approach. The children were being herded toward the trailer's rear doors. Sarah stumbled, and when a guard roughly pulled her upright, Marcus saw her scan the warehouse with desperate eyes. Even from 30 feet above, he could read her terror. Not today. Not on his watch. Marcus spotted the warehouse's electrical panel and smiled grimly. Sometimes the old ways were still the best ways. He dropped silently to the floor behind a stack of crates and made his way to the panel. One quick yank of the main breaker plunged the warehouse into darkness. Shouts erupted from below. Flashlight beams swept wildly as guards tried to re-establish control. In the chaos, Marcus moved like a predator through familiar darkness. His night vision, honed by countless operations in Afghanistan and beyond, gave him a decisive advantage. The first guard died quietly, a blade between his ribs before he could cry out. The second managed half a shout before Marcus silenced him permanently, but the third guard's panicked shooting gave away the game. "It's the SEAL," Kozlov's voice boomed through the darkness. "Kill him! Kill them all if you have to!" Marcus heard Sarah scream and felt something primal surge through his veins, the same protective rage that had made him legendary among his teams. These animals had made their last mistake. He advanced through the warehouse like death incarnate, using every lesson learned in the world's darkest corners. Flashbang grenades improvised from maintenance chemicals created chaos. Muzzle flashes became targets. The children's terrified cries became his navigation system. When emergency lighting finally flickered on, 6 guards lay dead, and Marcus stood between Kozlov and the children, his weapon trained on the trafficker's chest. Blood streamed from multiple wounds, but his aim never wavered. Kozlov smiled coldly, his own pistol pressed against Sarah's temple. Impressive, soldier, but ultimately pointless. Drop your weapon, or the girl dies right now. Sarah met Marcus's eyes across the blood-stained concrete, and he saw something that made his heart skip, not just fear but trust. She believed he would save her. He wouldn't let her down. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Marcus's smoke grenades detonated simultaneously. Thick grey clouds billowed through the cavernous space, turning the industrial lighting into hazy beacons that barely penetrated the artificial fog. Shouts echoed from multiple directions as Kozlov's men scrambled to assess the threat. Marcus moved like a ghost through the smoke, his night vision goggles rendering the obscured environment as clear as daylight. 23 years of combat experience had taught him that chaos was both weapon and shield. You either controlled it or it controlled you. The first guard emerged from the haze, assault rifle sweeping blindly. Marcus struck from behind, his knife finding the gap between the man's body armor. The guard dropped without a sound. 1 down, 7 to go. "Spread out. Find him." Kozlov's voice boomed from somewhere near the office complex. "He's just one man." Just one man. Marcus had heard that dismissive assessment before, usually from overconfident enemies who didn't understand what a properly trained operator could accomplish in the right circumstances. They were about to learn. A burst of automatic fire split the air near his position, muzzle flashes creating brief orange strobes in the grey murk. Marcus tracked the shooter's position and circled wide, using shipping containers as cover. The second guard was trying to establish a defensive position behind a forklift, but he'd made the classic mistake of staying stationary too long. The tactical knife flew through the smoke with practiced precision, catching the man in the throat. 2 down. "Santos! Rodriguez! Report!" Kozlov's commands were becoming more frantic as his men failed to check in. The drug lord was learning that military-grade smoke didn't just obscure vision, it destroyed communication and shattered unit cohesion. Marcus retrieved his knife and pressed deeper into the warehouse. Through his earpiece, he could hear Elena's frightened breathing from her hiding spot near the loading docks. She was following his instructions, staying low and quiet while he eliminated the threats between them. A new sound cut through the chaos, the metallic rattle of someone climbing the external fire escape. Kozlov was trying to reach higher ground for a better vantage point. Marcus smiled grimly. The drug lord's tactical instincts weren't completely wrong, but elevated positions worked both ways. Guards 3 and 4 came at him together, their coordination suggesting better training than the previous casualties. They moved in a practiced sweep pattern, covering each other's blind spots as they advanced through the smoke. Professional, but not professional enough. Marcus let them pass his concealment point, then emerged behind them like a vengeful shadow. The closer guard went down to a sleeper hold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. His partner spun at the sound of his colleague's equipment hitting the concrete, but Marcus was already inside his weapon's effective range. The fight was brief and vicious. The guard managed to land one solid punch before Marcus's knife ended the encounter permanently. 4 down, 4 to go. The smoke was beginning to thin near the warehouse's ventilation systems, creating pockets of clear air that forced Marcus to adjust his movement patterns. He could see Kozlov's silhouette now, positioned on a catwalk overlooking the main floor. The drug lord held a pistol in one hand and a radio in the other, presumably calling for reinforcements. "Victor, where are you?" Elena's panicked whisper crackled through his earpiece. "There's someone coming toward the loading dock." Marcus changed direction instantly, abandoning his approach on Kozlov to intercept the threat moving toward Elena's position. Through the thinning smoke, he could see 2 figures advancing methodically through the maze of shipping containers. They'd figured out where Elena was hiding. He reached the loading dock area just as the first guard rounded the container where Elena crouched. The man's eyes widened as he spotted the terrified girl, his weapon beginning to swing in her direction. Marcus's throwing knife caught him center mass before he could complete the movement. The guard stumbled backward, his rifle clattering across the concrete as he fell. The second guard reacted instantly, spinning toward Marcus's position with his weapon already firing. Bullets sparked off metal shipping containers as Marcus dove for cover, the ricochets whining dangerously through the confined space. "Elena, stay down!" Marcus shouted, drawing his sidearm as he rolled behind a concrete pillar. 6 down, 2 plus Kozlov remaining. The remaining guard was smart enough to take cover behind a forklift, creating a tactical standoff. Marcus could hear Kozlov shouting orders from the catwalk, directing his last man's fire toward Marcus's position. But the drug lord had made a critical error. In his focus on eliminating the immediate threat, he'd forgotten about the bigger picture. Marcus keyed his radio with one hand while returning suppressing fire with the other. "Elena, remember what I taught you about the loading dock controls?" "Yes," came her whispered reply. "On my mark, hit the master switch for bay doors 3 and 4. We're leaving, but not the way they expect." The end game was beginning, and Marcus intended to control every second of it. The safe house materialized from the darkness like a sanctuary from another world. Marcus pulled the stolen truck behind a cluster of pine trees, their branches scraping against the windshield as he navigated the narrow dirt path. The cabin sat in a natural clearing, its weathered logs and moss-covered roof making it nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Elena stirred in the passenger seat, her eyes fluttering open as the engine died. She'd slept fitfully during the 2-hour drive, startling awake at every bump and curve in the road. Marcus had kept one eye on the mirrors, watching for pursuit that never came, but he knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. "Where are we?" Elena's voice carried the raspy quality of exhaustion and fear. "Somewhere safe," Marcus said, though he knew safety was a relative concept when dealing with Kozlov's organization. "My friend Jake set this up for situations like this." Elena nodded, though Marcus caught the skeptical glance she threw at the isolated cabin. He couldn't blame her. Trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. They approached the front door together, Marcus's hand instinctively resting on the Glock tucked into his waistband. The key was exactly where Jake had said it would be, hidden beneath a loose board on the porch. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and old wood smoke, with dust motes dancing in the pale moonlight that filtered through small windows. Marcus flipped the light switch and nothing happened. He tried again, cursing under his breath. "Generator's probably off," he muttered, fumbling in the darkness for the emergency supplies Jake had mentioned. His fingers found a flashlight on a table near the door, and the beam revealed a sparse but functional interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a couch and 2 chairs arranged around it. A small kitchenette occupied the far corner, and Marcus spotted a narrow hallway leading to what he assumed was a bedroom and bathroom. "There should be a generator out back," he told Elena. "Give me a few minutes to get the power on." Elena grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. "Don't go outside, please." The fear in her voice cut through him like a blade. She'd been torn from everything familiar, thrust into a nightmare that had nearly consumed her. The last thing she needed was to be alone in the dark. "Okay," he said softly. "We'll make do with what we have." Marcus found candles in a kitchen drawer and lit them, placing them strategically around the main room. The flickering light created dancing shadows on the walls, but it was better than total darkness. In another drawer, he discovered canned food, bottled water, and a first aid kit. "When did you last eat?" he asked Elena, but she just shrugged, settling onto the couch and drawing her knees to her chest. Marcus heated a can of soup over the gas stove, grateful that it didn't rely on electricity. As the smell filled the cabin, he noticed Elena's posture relax slightly. Food was comfort, normalcy in a world that had become completely abnormal. While Elena ate, Marcus checked his encrypted phone for messages. 3 missed calls from Jake, but no texts. That could mean anything, and Marcus felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his gut. In his world, silence often meant trouble. "Who are you really?" Elena asked suddenly, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. Marcus looked up from his phone. "What do you mean?" "You move like them. The men who took me. You have that same awareness. But you're trying to help me." She set down the spoon and studied his face in the candlelight. "Are you police?" "No, not police." "Military?" Marcus hesitated. How much truth could she handle? How much did she need to know to trust him long enough to get her to safety? "I was. Navy. Special operations." Elena nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "And now?" "Now, I'm just someone who couldn't walk away when I saw you make that signal." They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the soft crackling of wax as candle flames danced in the still air. Marcus found himself studying Elena's face, seeing strength beneath the exhaustion. She'd survived something that destroyed many people, and she was still fighting. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Jake. "Kozlov's people are mobilizing. Safe house may be compromised. Move to secondary location by dawn." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. Jake's network was extensive, but it wasn't infallible. If Kozlov had resources Marcus didn't know about, if someone had talked or been compromised, the cabin's location could already be in enemy hands. He looked at Elena, who had curled up on the couch with her eyes closed. She deserved one night of peace, but peace was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Elena," he said gently, "we need to talk about tomorrow." Her eyes opened, instantly alert. She'd learned to read danger in people's voices, and she heard it now in his. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Marcus triggered the fire suppression system. Klaxons blared while freezing chemical foam cascaded from the ceiling, turning the cavernous space into a slippery maze of confusion. He pressed his advantage immediately, knowing surprise was his only ally against overwhelming numbers. 3 guards stumbled through the artificial fog, their weapons raised but useless in the whiteout conditions. Marcus moved like a phantom, his suppressed pistol coughing twice. 2 men dropped silently while the third spun wildly, firing blind rounds into the foam-choked air. "Sophia?" Marcus called out, hoping his voice would carry over the alarms. "Stay down! I'm coming!" Volkov's voice cut through the chaos from somewhere ahead. "Kill them both. Burn this place down if you have to." Marcus low-crawled beneath the thickest layer of suppressant, using the metal shipping containers as cover. His tactical training kicked in automatically, count shots, track movement, identify targets through sound and shadow. 4 more guards moved in formation toward the rear of the warehouse where he'd last seen Sophia. A muzzle flash illuminated the fog to his left. Marcus rolled right as bullets sparked off concrete inches from his head. He came up firing, putting 2 rounds sent a mass into a figure barely visible through the chemical haze. The man crumpled into a stack of wooden crates. The fire suppression system began to cycle down, and visibility started improving. Marcus could make out the warehouse layout now. Rows of shipping containers created narrow corridors leading to an office area in the back. That's where they'd take her. He sprinted forward, staying low. A guard emerged from behind a container, assault rifle tracking toward him. Marcus dove sideways, firing on the move. His shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before the guard could recover, Marcus was on him, driving his knife between ribs with surgical precision. "Boss, we've got a problem," someone shouted from the office area. "The girl's gone." Volkov's response was immediate and vicious. "Find her. Check every container, every shadow. She doesn't leave this building alive." Marcus felt cold dread in his stomach. Sophia was running free in a warehouse full of killers. He had to reach her first. Moving deeper into the maze of containers, he caught a glimpse of movement ahead. 2 guards working systematically through the rows, checking hiding spots. Marcus flanked wide, using their methodical search pattern against them. When they separated to cover more ground, he struck. The first guard never saw him coming. Marcus wrapped an arm around the man's throat, applying pressure until he went limp. The second turned at his partner's absence, finding Marcus's pistol inches from his face. "Where is she?" Marcus whispered. The guard's eyes were wide with terror. "I don't know, man. She just vanished when the foam started falling. Volkov's going crazy." Marcus put him down with a single shot and kept moving. A small sound, metal on metal, came from his right. He turned toward a partially open container. Its heavy door cracked just enough for a child to slip through. Moving carefully, he approached the entrance. "Sophia?" he whispered. "It's me." The man from the truck stop. Silence. Then, barely audible, "Help me." Marcus squeezed through the container opening and found her huddled behind a stack of boxes, her eyes wide with terror but alert. She was alive, unharmed, and she remembered him. "We're getting out of here," he said softly, holstering his weapon to appear less threatening. "Can you run?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Stay behind me. When I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. Understand?" Another nod. They emerged from the container into relative quiet. The alarms had stopped, but Marcus could hear boots on concrete and urgent voices coordinating a search. Volkov's men were regrouping, and their window was closing fast. Marcus led Sophia through the container maze toward the warehouse's rear exit, the same route he'd mapped during his reconnaissance. They moved in short rushes, using the metal boxes for cover. Sophia stayed right behind him, her small hand occasionally touching his back for reassurance. "There!" a voice shouted. "Movement in Sector 3!" Automatic weapons fire erupted behind them, bullets ricocheting off containers with metallic screams. Marcus grabbed Sophia and dove behind a forklift as the shooting intensified. "We're going to run for that door," he told her, pointing to an emergency exit 30 yards away. "No matter what happens, you keep running until you're outside, then hide until you see police cars. Real police cars with lights and sirens." Before she could respond, Marcus popped up and laid down covering fire, forcing their pursuers to seek cover. "Now!" They sprinted for the exit as the warehouse exploded with gunfire behind them. Marcus felt a bullet tug at his jacket, another spark off the floor beside his feet. The door grew larger with each step, salvation within reach. Then Volkov appeared directly in their path, rifle raised and ready. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus kicked down the door, his stolen rifle already spitting fire. 3 guards spun toward him, fumbling for their weapons, but Marcus had already calculated their positions from his surveillance. The first man dropped before his pistol cleared leather. The second managed to squeeze off a wild shot that shattered concrete above Marcus's head as a precise 3-round burst punched through his chest. The third guard dove behind a stack of shipping containers, screaming commands in broken English. Marcus rolled left, using a forklift for cover as automatic gunfire chewed through the air where he'd been standing. His mind shifted into combat mode, every sense heightened, time seeming to slow as muscle memory from 100 firefights took over. "Federal agent!" he roared, knowing it was a lie but hoping it might scatter the opposition. "Buildings surrounded!" A burst of nervous laughter echoed from deeper in the warehouse. Kozlov's voice cut through the din, heavily accented and amused. "Mr. Chen, your Navy SEAL has come to play hero. How touching." Marcus glimpsed movement between the containers, at least 4 more hostiles, plus Kozlov somewhere in the maze of cargo. His ammunition was limited, and every second brought him closer to reinforcements arriving. He had to move fast. Glass exploded overhead as muzzle flashes lit the shadows. Marcus sprinted between cover points, his boots silent on the concrete despite his speed. A gunman stepped around a container 20 feet ahead, AK-47 rising. Marcus put 2 rounds center mass before the man could complete his turn. "Sarah!" Marcus called out, hoping to hear her voice, to confirm she was still alive. A child's scream answered him from the warehouse's far end, high-pitched, terrified, but alive. Marcus's jaw clenched as he identified the sound's location, past at least 30 yards of hostile territory. Bullets sparked off metal inches from his head as he sprinted toward the scream. A bearded man stepped into his path, pistol extended. Marcus didn't slow down. He crashed into the gunman like a linebacker, driving his shoulder into the man's solar plexus. They went down hard, the pistol skittering across concrete. Marcus's knife found the man's throat before he could recover. 2 more guards converged on his position. Marcus grabbed the dead man's pistol and rolled behind a wooden crate as their rifles opened up, splinters exploding around him. He counted muzzle flashes, 7 rounds from the left gunman, 5 from the right. When their firing paused for reloads, Marcus popped up and double-tapped both men in rapid succession. "Impressive," Kozlov's voice echoed from ahead. "But you're too late." Marcus pressed forward, sweat stinging his eyes despite the cold night air. The warehouse opened into a larger space ahead, loading docks, overhead doors, and in the center, a black SUV with its engine running. Kozlov stood beside the vehicle's open rear door, one hand gripping Sarah's arm, the other holding a chrome-plated pistol to her head. The little girl's eyes were wide with terror, but she was alive, bruised, exhausted, but breathing. Marcus felt something cold and furious unfold in his chest. "Drop the rifle," Kozlov commanded. "Kick it away." Marcus stepped into the open, weapon raised, crosshairs centered on Kozlov's forehead. "Let her go. This is between us." "Nothing is between us, Mr. Chen. This is business." Kozlov's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle, now. Sarah's eyes met Marcus's across the distance. Even terrified, even brutalized, she still had fight left. Her small hand moved against her leg, the same distress signal she'd used at the truck stop, but modified. One finger extended, pointing down, toward Kozlov's feet. Marcus understood. The girl was telling him something about her captor's position, his balance, his vulnerability. Smart kid, brave kid. "You're right," Marcus said, slowly lowering his rifle. "It's just business." Kozlov smiled, thinking he'd won. Smart man. "Perhaps you understand." Marcus's rifle snapped back up as Sarah suddenly went limp, her dead weight throwing Kozlov off balance. The Russian stumbled, his pistol jerking away from her head for a split second. The rifle cracked once. Kozlov's head snapped back, his body crumpling. Sarah scrambled away from the falling corpse, running toward Marcus on unsteady legs. He caught her as she collapsed against him, small arms wrapping around his waist with desperate strength. She was shaking, tears streaming down her dirt-stained cheeks, but she was alive. She was safe. "It's over," Marcus whispered, one hand gently stroking her hair while the other kept his rifle ready. "You're going home." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Real federal agents this time, drawn by the gunfire and Marcus's earlier calls to Detective Morrison's contacts. They'd find evidence here, computers, records, enough to roll up the entire network. Sarah looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," Marcus smiled, feeling something broken inside his chest finally begin to heal. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help."